or Brian.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks everyone for coming who's in the room, and thanks for listening on Zoom for those of you on Zoom. I'm just going to introduce myself real quick and then hand it off to Jason to introduce himself, and then we'll go through our presentation. I think we're going to trade about halfway through, and then at the end, questions on Zoom are here. Go have at it. So I'm just, real quick. My name is Brian Kelleher. I'm a fisheries biologist for the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, or Masswildlife. That's our seal right there. We're here with DCR today. I'm a regional fisheries biologist, so I work actually out of the Belchtown office just down the road. I think it's like 1.25 miles down the road. Each of the district offices has a fisheries biologist, wildlife biologist, and a full complement of other staff. So I'm the fisheries biologist for that office. I do stuff like projects like this with Jason out of the field headquarters. This is a Creel project, in addition to like stocking trout in the ponds in the area and a couple other research projects locally. I do a fair amount of work in the Swift River as well, just down the road. I'll just pass it off to Jason real quick to introduce himself now.
Hi, thanks. My name is Jason Stolarski. I'm a fisheries biologist. I work out of the field headquarters in Westboro, Massachusetts, and I'm originally from Hadley. I grew up fishing on the Connecticut River and occasionally on Quabbin with my father in his Quabbin boat. So I deal with a lot of fisheries projects that are more statewide. I try to help out the districts as much as I can, and this was a great partnership with DCR this past summer, doing the Creel work out of Quabbin. So.
We'll start the presentation now, and we'll trade off again about halfway. So there we go. Okay, so just a little bit's getting cut off for those in person. So just a little bit about what is Masswildlife, what is DCR. We're all just different state agencies, so we're just going to kind of set it up to differentiate who we are and what we do before we get going. So Masswildlife, Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, was founded as a state fisheries commission 159 years ago in 1866. We're one of the oldest in the country as far as these agencies go. What do? We're responsible for conservation, restoration, and protection and management of fish and wildlife in their habitats. So that's why we're kind of here today to talk about fisheries in Quabbin. There we go. So just to get situated, kind of like I was just talking about a second ago. So Jason and I are both fisheries biologists for Masswildlife, but we work on different things in different areas. So I'm a regional fisheries biologist. I'm out of this office right here, the little red kind of thing that's a mile down the road, basically. Jason's out of our field headquarters out in Westboro right here. So just real quick, there's quite a few little icons in this general vicinity. You'll notice the blue squares of the fish, those are hatcheries. There's 5 in the state, 4 of them are in the Connecticut Valley District, just due to the availability of water. It's a really good place to have hatcheries. Pretty convenient for being the fisheries biologist for this area too. It's a lot easier to get those fish if you're 5 to 30 minutes away. Folks from these other offices still come out to these same hatcheries and then they go back to their respective districts. So the folks from this office out here near, in Air from the Northeast, they do the same thing. They drive out here, get their fish, and then kind of go back out and put them out there. There's an additional hatchery, if you'll notice, out in Sandwich. We do go out there 1 time per year for like specialty fish, but not too frequently. So here's all the other districts. There's Western, Valley, Central, Northeast, Southeast. We're currently in the Valley District, and my office is just kind of, we're there if you have any questions about this or anything else, or need to get a fishing license. And then within Masswildlife, where do we kind of fit into the state government? We're one of the executive kind of department agencies along with DCR. So we have multiple offices, just kind of rehashing this again, where we kind of fit in. There's offices in Boston that are kind of like our administrative offices and purchasing, accounting, things like that. Westboro is our headquarters. That's where like most of our staff are kind of based. Project leads, administration folks. Our director, Martise, is based out of that office. Then there's 5 districts. Valley District is one of them. And then there's 5 hatcheries that we kind of show on the other map. I think from here, we'll just kind of go in a little bit. I just wanted to put in a little bit of information about trout stocking. It's one of the things we do in this area that I kind of work on as a fisheries biologist. Been doing it for quite a while. Here's one of the older stocking trucks from a point in time that's quite a while ago. This is us stocking Quabbin in July, and that's one of our stocking trucks and one of our staff on there. Just kind of real quick, and we can talk about this after if anybody has any questions as well, but just kind of to go over before we get going with the Creel study. We stock 500 water bodies statewide, and out of those 500, 70% of the fish we put out are rainbow trout. The majority of them, I think like 80% are over 12 inches in size. A lot of them are bigger than that too. And then I think from here, oh, and yeah, why do we stock? The simplest answer is just to provide angling opportunities for recreational fishing. There's no goals as far as like reestablishment or like fixing any kind of environmental issue. It's just to provide a quality fishing experience for the folks in Massachusetts. So by saying that, we're putting out fish that are catchable size, like a fish, the fish we put out on the day we put it out would be, we're hoping, enjoyable for someone to catch that same day. We're not looking for any kind of growing or like reestablishment or anything, just a take fishery. Okay, so here's what the actual presentation is about today. I don't know if this will work with the Zoom folks, but does anybody here in person know what a creel survey is or have heard that word before? It's a pretty simple thing. All it really means is angler survey. It's just a fancy word for that, kind of based off, you could probably guess this, but it's terminology is kind of based off of the little basket that folks would use to put fish in when they're catching them. I don't know if they're used too much anymore, but so what's in your creel basket? This is a picture of the card we use, which we'll get into a little later. This was a voluntary card-based creel survey. All answers were anonymous, and we had a whole bunch of help from DCR, boat ramp attendants and staff to actually hand out these cards. So these were given out at the 3 primary access points on the reservoir, which we'll get into in further detail, but we just wanted to say thanks to them now for giving us a hand with this project. We couldn't have done it. We wouldn't have any of this data that we're presenting today without them. Rick.
There are no brown trout or brook trout survey.
I don't know. We'd gone through, do you know, Jason? We don't stock them, but they not into the reservoir. No, not into the reservoir. But there is a possibility that the brookies, like as you well know, could be caught in some of the tribs. But no.
Those fish are in there, and they're not stocked.
Yeah.
And isn't it of interest to the division?
Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh sorry.
Just, we had a little quiet on.
Yeah.
You mind also just checking your volume on your computer? Thank you for your patience, everyone, going back and forth between.
Which volume?
Nope,
The
sorry.
mic volume?
Yep, it's the mic. You're all the way up, so.
Okay, I can try. Doesn't just too quick. I can walk it out there. I'm usually very quiet. Sure. So the question we just had was about brook trout and brown trout being on the creel card. We didn't include them. We had some write-ins for other species that were excluded from this. This is just due to, size, most common fish. We didn't have any write-ins in those. I don't know if anybody here, like Sid, for instance, if you fish quabbin. Sorry. Yeah, that wrote in brook trout or brown trout. Yeah, like for instance, the sunfish category here confused a couple folks where that's like an inclusive category. So someone wrote I call bluegill just on the cards, but I didn't get any brook or brown trout entries and like as a write-in. It's possible they're out there though, especially fishing near maybe one of the tributaries, but not a major contributing species to this creel in any way.
Kind of along the same question. He asked why a fish is missing, and you said because we don't stock it. But there are fish out there that you don't stock, unless I misunderstand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Small bass.
No, two different things. Yeah, they're just not a species that we regularly encounter in Quabbin, mostly. No, brook trout and brown trout. Yeah, have you ever caught a brook trout or brown trout in Quabbin? Like a while ago, maybe. Yeah. Well, maybe it's something that if we do this again, we could add it at the end and see what we get, but.
Yeah, we try to come up with the most popular species that would be caught because there's only so much real estate on the card. So, and it's a balance between making the user filling it out confused versus kind of simplicity.
I understand.
but worth looking into for sure. We have a better view of the card too going on here. So this is just a little further on what is a creel survey. There's a bunch of different ways to do creel surveys. This is just one of the approaches. It's one of the ways to interact with anglers, basically. Another common one where if you've fished other places might be you would encounter like a creel agent where someone with a clipboard would come up and talk to you and actually interview you. That would be great, but pretty staff demanding. The one we designed here is more designed to get to as many folks as possible in the easiest way possible. Some things you could do with creel surveys, like Jason kind of brought up, this is a pretty simplistic creel survey. We have like very kind of finite goals we're looking to do. We could ask a whole slew of different questions that are pretty common. Like sometimes folks ask like, how far are you coming from? How much did you spend on this fishing trip? You can get all kinds of like economic things with this. We were mostly just looking for the amount of effort exerted on Quabbin, what are people fishing for, and what are they catching and at what rate? So we'll get into that a little later. And from that information, these are the main kind of things we were looking to summarize here. The catch, which is just is as simple as that. What are people catching? Harvest is what did you catch and keep? And then species targeted. So the big ones here, if you fish here, you probably know you're fishing for probably lake trout, salmon, and bass like smallies. Those are the bulk of what it seemed like people were going for. This is just a little bit more about creel surveys. Here's a picture of just one of the boat ramps with a little sign we had there to remind them to fill out the survey. So the data we collect is just, this is the first year this has been done in quite a while by Masswildlife. And we have, just to get a kind of a better understanding of what's going on out there, allow us to have kind of more informed decisions. Yeah. So just you guys probably all know this, but here's just to get us situated. There's 3 primary boat accesses on Quabbin Reservoir. This is pretty much an ideal situation for conducting a creel. So there's 3 places to get in and they're all staffed by professionals and there's business hours. It's not a situation a lot of creel surveys would have any hope of having. Normally you just like would randomly encounter people when you happen to see them. We are aware that there's shore fishing that happens between these, but for this project, we focus primarily on these boat access points. In addition to that, as you well know, there's barrels that kind of break up these 2 different areas. So from gate 43 or gate 31, you can access that basin. Whereas if you launch in gate 8, you're relegated to that kind of basin. And we did find some differences in the like fishing activity would be pretty obvious. But did you have a question? Yes, we did. Yeah, that's pretty important. I think it might be the first question actually. Well, I think at the next slide we'll see that. And that's one of the most, maybe not the most important, but it is a very important. Like without that information, we would not have been able to use that card that was returned in. Like if that was left blank, we'd skip that one actually. Which, oh, gear. For this survey, we didn't. For this one, we didn't. Other ones do though, like to designate between fly fishing, spin fishing, bait casting. But this one, just for the simplicity's sake, we figured the more questions we had, the less likely someone's going to fill the thing out. So we kept it pretty concise. But people do ask that pretty frequently.
Not sure why, because it shows that you're sharing, but on the Zoom it does not show. Sorry.
Oh, like statewide? This is not Quabbin though. This is statewide. It's a brown trout, brook trout, and a very small number of tiger trout. And we do stock salmon in Quabbin Reservoir. The bulk of them are rainbow trout though. Oh. Through New Jersey, I believe. We don't raise those here. Oops, sorry.
Where you got it done.
All right. So we were just talking about why Quabbin's such a good place to do a creel survey. There's a lot of regulations, as you know. Those regulations lend themselves well to conducting a survey like this. There's staffed access points and there's very concise season and very concise business hours effectively. Unless someone's breaking the law, we're not gonna miss them we're not gonna miss their boat trip. We also have a ton of, which we'll rely on later, and Jason will talk about, the effort data that we're using for this comes directly from DCR. So if you've launched a boat in DCR, one of these ramps before, you know they collect a whole bunch of information. There's the boat seal program. They were nice enough to share that information with us, so we know exactly how many boaters were on the reservoir this year, which we then compare with some of the Creel card information. Okay, so here's just a couple more things. The Quabbin Creel survey was designed to be like a voluntary survey. When you were to launch a boat, the DCR gate attendants would hand you one of the blank cards, and then when you're done, you could either return it there or return it another time. And then eventually they would get picked up and then make our way back to my office down the road, and I'd enter the data. Okay, so here's a better view of that Creel card. And Rick, you're right there. So there's the species we have. We did leave some off and banded some. I don't remember exactly the actual numbers, but the bulk of the returns would be lake trout, salmon, smallmouth, largemouth from this survey, which is probably not surprising for folks that fish the reservoir. And then since this is a voluntary survey filled out by guys on like people out fishing, we did have this is the back of the card, just some informational reminder type things, just to like go, so how do you tell the difference between a lake trout and a salmon, if in case you didn't know, because that's pretty important. And then a little bit about our adipose fins and what is an adipose fin, what does it mean, where is it? And I have a slide on that too before we get too far. So yeah, here's asking about the date. It's the first field. We had a designation for boat versus shore fishing. The vast majority of these were boat anglers. I think we only had 39 shore cards filled out. Number of people fishing, which is very important for downstream calculations. The number of rods used. We ended up not doing too much with this field. This would be like because you're allowed to use X number of rods at a time, that would potentially increase the effort you're exerting. Time starting and time fishing is pretty important for calculating like how much effort you put out there fishing. And then the whole gamut of what you caught and what you did with it. So here's just an example card filled out. This date is outside the open period for Quabbin Reservoir, but so this is how you'd fill it out if you went fishing on the 23rd of March, 24 by boat. You went out with 2 people. Between the two of you, had 2 rods. You started at 7, got off the water at 11. What were you targeting? Which is like, what are you hoping to catch? What are you fishing for? There's probably gear differentiations with that. This example person was targeting lake trout and salmon, which is pretty common. And then what did they catch? So while they're out catching, they caught 1 smallmouth bass, did not keep it, so 0, let it go. White perch, they caught 2 and kept 2. And then the salmon and lake trout fields have a little bit more information involved just because of the fin clips. But they caught 4 lake trout, let them all go. Out of those 4 lake trout, 2 of them had adipose fin clips. Same thing for the salmon here. Caught 3 salmon, kept 1 of the 3, and all 3 of the salmon had adipose clips in this example. And if you're not familiar with what that means with adipose clips, here's just a quick reminder slide. They mean very different things for the 2 species of fish that we're talking about. And for those who've never kind of seen this before, like what is an adipose clip? Why are you clipping it? This is one of the most common fisheries marking techniques that's out there. It's built into regulations in some other states where you say can't keep a fish with an added fin pleasant. Just mostly, sometimes it indicates hatchery origin. So for us here on Quabbin Reservoir, a salmon with a clipped adipose fin means it's a hatchery fish. So at the hatchery, this little fin right here is clipped prior to them being stocked. So if you were to catch a salmon in Quabbin Reservoir now with an adipose fin present, that would be a wild fish. Whereas if you caught one, the vast majority of them are clipped adipose fin, hatchery fish. For the lake trout, however, totally different meaning. Same fin, different meaning. We run a marker capture growth study using pit tags on Quabbin Reservoir for lake trout. So the fin clip on the back of the lake trout is just used to indicate it and contains a pit tag in its body cavity, so you can't see them. It's just a little microchip. So if you were to catch a lake trout with a fin clip in Quabbin Reservoir, it just means it's pit tagged, and we've interacted with it as part of that project. Keep them? The pit tags or the fish, yes. Pit tags too, yes. They're the same as like if you had a dog that's microchipped, it's just a little 12mm RFID tag. It'd be in their pelvic girdle, the place between their two fins, and it's about as big as a grain of rice, basically. But yeah. If you did find one, we could bring it in and tell you something about the fish too. That's come up a couple times. I think this might be where you trade, Jason. Okay.
So just visiting back on the adipose clips, do you guys, when you go out there fishing, do you look for fin clips when you catch a fish? I know sometimes it's exciting. I've been out there too, where you catch a lake trout or something, and then I'm the biologist, I do this stuff, and I forget to look to see if it has a fin clip. So do you guys see fin clipped lake trout or salmon when you go out fishing? No? Yeah. The smallmouth guy, yeah. Well, just keep it in the back of your mind. It's always interesting to know. I mean, because the tributaries in Quabbin, they produce landlocked salmon smolts every single year. Not that many, maybe anywhere between 4, 5, 6,000. But none of those fish have the fins. So if you catch an adult fish, salmon in the Quabbin, with that fin, it was produced in a tributary and grew its whole life in the reservoir. And so it's a pretty neat story, I think. The question is I said there was 4 to 5 to 6,000 smolts produced out of the Quabbin tributaries. We sample the Quabbin tributaries every single fall and get estimates, counts of the number of landlocked salmon smolts. And if you extrapolate that based upon the streams we sample and where we know the fish travel up into, it comes out to about that. It's highly variable though. If we have good water years at the end of the year, the salmon get up everywhere. They travel up. It's what they do. But in low water years, sometimes no fish get up. So just young of the year fish before they leave. Yeah. Okay. So now on to some of the results from the survey. So when an angler goes to the boat ramp, they either take a card or they receive a card from a DCR boat attendant, right? It's then beholden upon that person who has the card to fill it out and return it on when the person gets back. So that's response rate, right? If you get a card or you take a card and you give it back, you're actively participating in the survey, you're responding. So what is the response rate of the people who got the cards? Well, we broke it up by gate. So on gate 31, 282 Creel cards were distributed, were handed out, and we got 174 back. And the numbers are a little bit better at gate 43 and gate 8, where you have 580 distributed, 430 turned in, and then 533 versus 350 that's coming back at gate 8. So that equates to approximately a 70% respondent rate, which is actually very, very good. So if you got a card, 70% of the people returned it back filled in. That's excellent. What we could have done a little bit better on is what I determined as coverage. So because we have the DCR boat launch data, we know exactly how many people launched a boat out of every single ramp. So if we look at gate 31, for instance, there was approximately 2,000, 2,500 launches, and we got, what did I say last time? Roughly 200 cards back. So overall, when you average this across the gates, it's only about a 20% coverage rate of the anglers going out. Only 20% of the people who launched and fished got a card and brought it back to us with information. And it's probably, the worst was out of gate 31. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward, that the response rate was great, but we didn't get as many people as probably as we'd like, but 20% is actually still pretty good. I asked our human dimensions biologist in headquarters what the average response rate was when you guys get if you get the annual hunting survey at the end of the year from Masswildlife, what's the response rate on that? And he says, it varies between 10 and 20%. So it's kind of in line. All right. So this is just the boat launch data, the DCR boat launch data broken up by gate and by month. And if you guys recall, through Sid's great efforts, gate 43 was closed for a period of time in May because it was getting paved. So I'm just going to add a little bump into here, and then the trend really becomes more apparent, where you get this greater effort in May and June, and then it kind of tapers off or levels off as the season progresses. But a total of 7,000 individual boat launches at Quabbin in 2024. So it looks like the most was out of gate 31, although once again, they could have gotten the people who normally went to gate 43, moved up to gate 31. But lots of effort in the spring, and then, leveling out or tapering as the year progresses. Yes, yes.
And that a lot of people,
Mhm.
but it's closed because of.
The invasive. Yeah. Yep. All right, so this gets at the targeting. So when you filled out the card, you got to check next to the species of which you were targeting, right? So for simplicity's sake, we binned all the target species. We binned it to cold water fish, which are lake trout, salmon, rainbow trout, which are these black bars on the bottom. Warm water species, which is largemouth bass and smallmouth bass, which are these lightest bars on the top. And then in instances where we couldn't determine what, the kind of like, oh, I'm just going for anything, which is kind of what I do. We added that as a no preference field, and that's the middle bar here going through. So some of the trends I see here is a lot of people are fishing for lake trout at a gate 31, or excuse me, smallmouth bass or bass out of gate 31 early in the season. And then the bulk of the fishing pressure we see throughout all months and gates is largely for cold water fish. All right, so now catch rates. So how we calculate when you report the catch, we divide it by how long it takes you to catch what you are going to catch, right? So it's just the number of fish per hour is how we talk about catch. So on average, for all species in all gates, we find an average catch rate of roughly half a fish an hour. So that means for the average person, it takes 2 hours to catch one fish, and that's all species combined. And if we break that apart by month, we see that it's highest for July. So the red line is the average there, and folks fishing you tend to the catch rate is higher than average in July, September, and October, and slightly below average in these other months. And then we can go a step further and break it out by species. So what are the catch rates for individual species? Now remember, this is an average, right? It's an average across months. And looking across gates. So it's 0.18 fish per hour for lake trout. But that rate varies depending upon what month you fish and what gate you go out of. So once again, those red lines are the average rate of 0.18 lake trout per hour. And you can see based upon what gate and what month the catch rates exceed that. What stands out to me here is, July at gate 31 and gate 43. I mean, July, it looks like, is one of the highest catch rates for lake trout. And it's most likely people targeting them, with downriggers in the specific area of cold water where they inhabit during that time. Do you have a question, sir? Mm-hmm. Well, so there have. Yeah. So the question was, do we have any information to compare? And we'll get to that in a few moments. All right. So that's for lake trout. Now for salmon, we see roughly similar catch rate, 0.12 fish per hour. And I'm sure the way we calculate it might make it seem why those rates are so low, right? No. Yeah. Target. Yeah. We won't get into that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's just by how you calculate the data. But once again, we see kind of a similar pattern where July, August, and September, those summer months, people are really catching salmon at rates higher than the average during those months. Once again, presumably going out on the boat and targeting them, and they do well. Gate 31, not a lot of salmon are being caught at gate 31. For rainbow trout, kind of the same pattern, low rates at other gates, and then you see that spike in July and August. It's likely people catching, going for salmon, going for lake trout, and getting rainbow trout, or going for rainbow trout and getting them. Yes, sir. Yes. And then now for bass, kind of the similar rate, 0.11 fish per hour. But as you can see, gate 31 early season, people are catching bass at rates far exceeding the kind of annual average. And that's where a lot of that pressure, the pressure for bass is out there. But also recall that our response rate was the kind of the lowest for gate 31. So if there was any people we were missing, it might be those bass anglers out of that gate. That may, it's, yeah, no, it doesn't. It's like 0.6, 0.5 to 0.6 fish per hour. So. No, there is no state regulation that Mass Wildlife has that discourages or prohibits people from fishing.
Smallmouth bet on beds, helpless. Taking a female full of eggs is a crime, but.
Well, so that leads us into our next. Well, let's just. I will address that though. We'll address that. So back to the comparison. So how do we compare these data to kind of different, periods of time? So we were able to find some Creel data back from the 1980s. The fishing information, unfortunately, we were reading off it of a report, and we didn't understand because the report was kind of light on the methodologies behind it. And if you don't calculate the data the same way we do this year as they did in the 80s, the comparisons are meaningless. So it was Thursday or Friday, right when we realized we were interpreting the way they did things back in the 80s incorrectly. So we can't address that part right now, but we were able to look at the angular trips. So in the 1980s, they calculated angular trips as one part of that Creel survey. And we have the DCR launch data from 2019 to present, which we can compare. So everything to the right here is 2019 and onwards, the DCR data, and this data right here to the left of that red line is the angular trips from essentially 1981 to 1991. And you can see there's been a big drop off in the number of angular trips on Quabbin from that period of time. Now, remember, there's a 20-year gap here in where that red line is, where we don't really have good information.
Big drop off is, I'm sure you know, and probably everybody in this room knows, is related to the zebra mussel fiasco, where after that, everybody had to chain their boats to the trailers. Before that, you could fish Quabbin all the time. And now, if you want to fish Quabbin, you have one boat. And it's restricted to Quabbin and Quabbin only.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
a huge impact on the number of launches.
Recall, DCR, I mean, Quabbin is primarily a drinking water reservoir, so there are other concerns that come into play in terms of accessing it and recreating on it. So that trend in the declining usage of Quabbin, like he says, the SEAL program also could be a play, but it's a trend that's mirrored in hunting and fishing in the state since the 1950s. So this is the license holder sales data that we have from 1955 to 2021. And we see an average rate up till about the mid-90s of about 225,000 license sales per year. And since then, we've lost probably about 50,000 anglers during that time. So we're almost in a new paradigm of hunting and fishing recreation activities. And if you look at this far graph, that big spike on the right, you guys know what that one was? COVID. Everybody got outside, and if you tried to get outside, as I did, because I always get outside, it was difficult to do so because it was mobbed. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so these are the catch rates again for the three large, three biggest species: bass, largemouth and smallmouth, lake trout, and salmon. Once again, 0.11, 0.18, and 0.2. Now, we can also estimate the harvest rate for these fish, right? Because we asked the question, how many did you take? So for bass, it was 3/1000ths of a fish per hour. All right. And for lake trout, it was 6/1000ths of a fish per hour. Salmon was higher. It was only, 0.035. So people do harvest salmon at higher rates in Quabbin relative to these other fish. So because we have the DCR boat launch data, we can extrapolate those harvest rates and those catch rates to actual estimated numbers of fish caught and fish harvested. So for bass, it was approximately 7,000 fish with a harvest of 235 fish. And once again, these are estimated. Lake trout, around 11,000 fish with 422 fish harvested. For salmon, it was 7,000 fish with roughly 2,000 harvested for 2024. Now, it would be nice to have numbers from Creel survey going back, but unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. But we can, Wachusett Reservoir has a Creel survey that they run every single 5 years. The methods are comparable, so we can take their numbers and compare. So for Wachusett, you can see a bass catch rate of 0.07, which is low, slightly lower. I would say it's basically the same as Quabbin. For lake trout, once again, 0.07, which is much, in Quabbin, it's much higher. And for salmon, they don't catch a lot of salmon at Wachusett. The population of salmon at Wachusett is much smaller. We do not stock salmon at Wachusett, so it's all production from the Stillwater River and from Gates Brook, so 2 main rivers. Although they are taking the Quinnipoxet Dam out right now, it is out. So presumably the salmon will run up the Quinnipoxet and will double the amount of spawning habitat for the fish there. So that's something to look forward to.
There's no boat launch.
No, I'm not talking about fishing. I'm talking about salmon populations in Wachusett. So the salmon population is smaller because it's not supplemented through stocking. And in both reservoirs, tributary spawning habitat is limited.
Based on the shore fishery, catch rate of Quabbin is probably highly skewed towards the boat fishing.
It is. It's still a comparison. Yeah, it's still a rate. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, that's because people are fishing out of boats, possibly because they catch, it allows for more fish to be caught.
Fishing in Quabbin is not a lot.
I can imagine. I've done it before. It is.
You gotta be a young person, you gotta be willing to pick ticks off you.
You would be surprised because I have met a lot of Wachusett anglers who are your age, all of yours is older, and they hike miles to get in. I'm friends with a diehard Wachusett angler, and I've thought about getting him and Sid or one of you guys together, but it might just be like fire and water. So there's still an opportunity, but Wachusett fishing is different, yes. And I'd like to point out also the harvest rates. So for Wachusett, 2,000ths of a fish per hour for bass is similar to what we see in Quabbin. The lake trout harvest rate is higher at Wachusett than it is at Quabbin by quite a bit. And inversely, because they don't catch a lot of salmon, not a lot of salmon are harvested. So the salmon harvest rate at Quabbin is much higher.
After all that effort.
Yep. All right. So what can we conclude from this in the absence of other Creel data we compare? Quabbin trips overall angling effort at Quabbin is down from the 1950s onwards. We're almost in a new paradigm of angler license sales. People just don't get outside to recreate as much as they used to. If you have kids or have grandkids, get them outside. It's what I enjoy to do. I'm sure it's what you guys enjoy to do as well. And as you said, sir, the SEAL program could also be limiting use. It's a high barrier of entry for use at Quabbin. And what? Yeah. Well, I mean,
SEAL at some time and get it inspected here, which is wonderful, and I appreciate that service exists, but it was a huge kick in the rear end.
Yeah.
For anglers.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can also, if you chose to, and granted the access isn't as good as at Wachusett, but you could choose to hike in and fish, and you would not need to seal your equipment. So these annual average catch rates are kind of on the lower side for Quabbin, but they're similar to what we see at Wachusett, and the rates are variable across month, species, and location. People are certainly better than average catching cold water fish in the hottest months of the year due to better technology, right? Bass at Gate 31 in spring is also extremely popular. People catch rates at much higher, catch fish at rates higher than the annual average. And unfortunately, currently, we only have real comparisons to Wachusett. So I would consider, aside from the lake trout, people catch more lake trout and more salmon out of Quabbin. As you guys say, it's because they're fishing from shore, and those fish are inaccessible to them during the summer months because you physically cannot cast far enough to get into the deep water. And another notable difference is that people are more likely to catch and harvest lake trout in Wachusett rather than Quabbin. So harvest rates, but aside, if you combine the lack of declines in participation combined with low harvest rates, you get low harvest of fish. And the contributions of harvest, or the removal of those fish from harvest, are exceedingly low. They don't do much to the populations. One might even argue that more fish die from old age than are removed from the population through harvest every single year. And that kind of ties our hands.
Large nutrient poor reservoir.
Yep. Sure. So Quabbin and Wachusett are unlike, if you guys fish elsewhere, are unlike any other place in the state. They're the deepest reservoirs. They also have some of the lowest nutrient content. And that's because, the Division of Water Supply Protection, it's their job to keep nutrients out of the water body. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and there are other species, nitrates, nitrites, things of that nature. So those, fuel autotrophic production at lower trophic levels, and then it all builds up. But at the same time, you get more weeds, you get more algae, you get more problems with water quality. And for a drinking water supply reservoir, can't have that. So oftentimes you'll see special restrictions on what you can do in a drinking water supply reservoir, right? You have to keep invasives out. I live around Wachusett right now, and I live in Holden, which is right next to Wachusett, and they're all constantly adding, what are those things called? They're just pools that collect runoff from the road. So it keeps salt out of the reservoir, it keeps pollution from roads out of the reservoir. And clean drinking water is, like I said, is why these reservoirs exist. But at the same time, they also keep out nutrients, which fuels productivity from the bottom up, and ultimately contributes to the standing crop of fish populations. Which is why the comparison to Wachusett is really the only meaningful comparison you could make. You wouldn't compare catch rates at Quabbin to catch rates at, say, I don't know, like Forest Lake, Palmer, or something like that. It's just not the same. Maybe to some of the larger, like Long Pond out on the Cape, that might be comparable, but. Oh yeah, I missed that influence of boats. It's a big deal. So I think I said most of this already. Harvest rate of lake trout greater, Wachusett salmon. Yep, you do have to hike in a good ways. So I would be remiss if I didn't overstate the importance of the DCR boat attendants in collecting these data. We would have liked to have gotten a little bit more information, but this was actually really, really good stuff that we got, and it's useful.
I would back that up, Sandy. All the lunches are great.
Yeah.
Very professional, get you on the water quick, get you out friendly, but they don't bend your ear.
And I'd like to thank Quabbin Fishermen's Association as well for helping us publicize this Creel survey, and all the anglers who participated. If you guys got out on the water, filled out a card every single day, it's what we need. And yeah.
Like QR codes at the fishing centers, then you can just use your smartphone and significantly easier way to get data back.
So we thought about that, and there is the Westfield. There was something about IT that they didn't want us doing that. And then cell service, I don't know about cell service, had all the ramps. So if you have to go down in cell service and suddenly we don't get response for a month or so or something like that, then that would affect the way we calculate the rates. But we have thought about that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also, it's nice to have something physical in your hand too, because you see it and you remember that, oh, I should probably fill that out and turn it in. But like, if you were to make it into a digital survey, that would certainly streamline lots of aspects, but we might not get the same response because you just read a sign and say, oh, I should do that. And then you just take off. So that's, yeah. Yes, sir.
Retired fisheries biologist, and I have accomplished a lot of field surveys. I think the participation rate in this survey is abysmal. And it was. I engaged this year once. I was asked by one of the. I'll take that. We have a lack of fine. Physical lack of fine.